You must understand, before anything else, that what you call a rare aura is not an invention of modern spirituality, but an ancient psychological reality. It is the energetic signature of a soul whose sensitivities grew faster than its defenses. In analytical psychology, I would say it is the field of the psyche in its most permeable, most unprotected state. Many of you who sit here today carry this rare aura without ever having known why the world seemed to move through you instead of around you. You believed, wrongly, that something was broken, but nothing was broken. Something was open, and that openness attracted both light and darkness, both love and manipulation. When an empath carries the rare aura wound, they project an unconscious invitation to the narcissist. Enter my field, shape my emotions, override my truth. It is not spoken in words, it is spoken in the psychic frequencies of early childhood. In the invisible language learned before the ego was even formed, the narcissist does not consciously understand it either. They simply sense a space they can fill, a softness they can insert themselves into, a doorway in the psychic house that was left unguarded. And so, many empaths spend years thinking the narcissist is a monster. But I tell you now, the narcissist is not the real prison. The real prison is the unhealed aura that allowed the narcissist to become a psychological architect of your inner life. What you mistake for destiny is often only a reenactment of the wound that shaped you. I have observed for decades that the empath who has not healed their aura wound lives in a perpetual echo of the mother archetype, the mother who could not see them clearly, the mother who did not mirror them emotionally, the mother who unconsciously conditioned them to make themselves smaller, quieter, sweeter, more compliant, so that love could breathe in the room. This mother archetype is not always the biological mother. It may be the early environment, the family system, or even the cultural atmosphere that taught you to survive by disappearing. The rare aura wound is formed precisely in this disappearing. When the child learns that their emotional truth disrupts the field, the psyche develops a survival mechanism. Let me dissolve myself to preserve connection. This is the seed of the empath's tragedy and also their future greatness. For anything that dissolves to survive can one day reassemble to transform, but before transformation, the wound becomes a psychic opening that predators intuitively sense. That is why the narcissist is drawn to you like a shadow seeking a lantern. They feel the opening in your field, the unprotected vulnerability, the ancient softness, and they do not love it, they consume it. They feed on it. And yet, you must not interpret this feeding as a sign of your weakness. It is a sign of your potency. Parasites do not attach to what is barren, they attach to what is fertile. The rare aura is extremely fertile. It carries imagination, intuition, symbolic perception, dream wisdom, and emotional alchemy. When the narcissist senses this, They sense something they lack, so they attach themselves to your psyche like a vine twisting around a tree. Not because they love the tree, but because they need the tree's height, the tree's sunlight, the tree's stability. Without you, they feel the hollowness of their own unintegrated shadow. This is the psychic grip. It is not physical, not logical, not rational. It is archetypal, invisible, deep. It is the unconscious pact formed between your wound and their emptiness. And this pact endures until one thing happens. You heal the wound. Healing the rare aura wound is not an act of external liberation, but an act of internal re-solidification. The moment the empath reclaims the psychic territory that was once porous, the narcissist loses access. It is like a dream in which a figure has always haunted you. But the moment you become lucid, it fades. Awareness dissolves possession. Some of you believe healing is a gentle ascension into light. It is not. Healing the rare aura wound is a descent into the mother shadow, into the ancestral patterns, into the childhood rooms where your emotions were minimized, gaslit, or shaped to fit the needs of others. This is why empaths struggle. They have avoided their own darkness, believing that goodness requires purity, but purity is not goodness. Purity is fragility. Goodness is strength, and strength requires shadow. So when I speak of healing, I speak of an empath who finally stops running from the places inside themselves that feel too heavy, too dark, too dense. For the rare aura wound is not healed by fleeing. It is healed by facing. You must walk back into the room of your earliest emotional abandonment. You must confront the image of the parent who looked through you instead of at you, who needed you emotionally rather than nurturing you emotionally. You must stand there, not as the child who begged for love, but as the adult who can now recognize the archetype behind the parent. Because once you see the archetype, you are no longer trapped in the personal story. You are lifted into the symbolic dimension where the soul rewrites its patterns through consciousness. It is in this dimension that healing truly begins, when the empath stands before the mother archetype and says, I see you and I release you. A profound shift occurs. The psychic field begins to condense. What was once diffuse begins to form boundaries. The aura becomes less permeable. And in that moment, the narcissist feels it sometimes before you do. They feel the field closing. They feel the door that was once open slowly swinging shut. They feel the emotional supply drying, the psychic permission being revoked, the unconscious contract dissolving, and they panic, because without your aura, they must face their own emptiness. Without your emotional alchemy, they must confront their own psychic stagnation. Without your rare light, they must sit alone with the shadow they have avoided their entire life. This is why narcissists suddenly become angry, possessive, or destabilized when an empath begins to heal. They are not losing a partner, they are losing a psychic host. The real liberation is not breaking up with the narcissist. The real liberation is closing the wound that fed them. Healing the rare aura wound is the removal of the psychic doorway, and the narcissist, who once entered your field so effortlessly, now finds himself outside, unable to reach you, unable to influence you, unable to distort your truth. They lose their grip not because you fought them, but because you became someone who no longer needed to be gripped. That is the secret. The empaths who heal do not defeat narcissists, they outgrow them. They ascend into a new psychological atmosphere where the old manipulations cannot breathe. In the next part, I will take you deeper into the symbolic anatomy of the aura, into the unconscious mechanisms that keep empaths trapped, into the dream motifs that reveal whether your psychic field is still open, and into the archetype that marks the exact moment you break the narcissist's invisible hold. As we continue, I want you to feel the atmosphere around you shifting, as though the psyche itself is leaning closer to listen. For what we are discussing now belongs not to the language of the conscious mind, but to the silent exchanges of the unconscious, to the realm where dreams are born, where archetypes whisper, and where the soul negotiates its secret contracts. Many of you live your entire lives unaware that these contracts exist, unaware that the psychic agreements formed in childhood do not dissolve simply because you outgrow the body that housed them. They persist, woven into the aura, shaping the emotional field that others sense long before you utter a word. This is why you often feel, even in adulthood, that certain people read you too easily, penetrate your emotional atmosphere too quickly, or bind themselves to you in ways you cannot explain. What you interpret as chemistry or soul connection is often the recognition of a familiar wound. The narcissist, especially the psychologically hungry one, identifies the wound's frequency with surgical precision. They sense the unprotected edges of your field, the softness of your boundaries, the openness of your psychic membrane. These things, left unhealed, form a kind of spiritual scent that only the shadow-attuned can detect. But here is the deeper truth. The rare aura wound is not merely an emotional vulnerability. It is an unconscious survival strategy born from early relational trauma. When the child recognizes long before language that expressing their true self threatens the bond with the caregiver, the psyche performs a kind of self-sacrifice. It hides the authentic self behind a luminous surface of compliance and empathy. The child learns to read the mother's mood before reading their own, to soothe the father's chaos before soothing their own fear, to shrink so that others may expand. And in this shrinking, the aura becomes porous. A porous aura is not weak, it is adaptive. It is the psyche's attempt to maintain attachment in an environment where attachment feels conditional. But what works in childhood becomes disastrous in adulthood, for a porous aura allows others especially those with predatory psychological patterns, to project their unmet needs into your energy field, to install their unmet desires into your emotional body, to shape your perceptions without resistance. This is why the empath often feels they lose themselves in relationship. It is not metaphorical. They literally dissolve into the other's psyche. Now, the narcissist's psychic grip begins precisely here with this dissolution. The narcissist does not seduce the empath's conscious mind. They seduce the unconscious vulnerability. They mirror your dreams, your fears, your longings, until you cannot distinguish where you end and where they begin. This merging is intoxicating at first because it feels like connection, but it is not connection. It is possession disguised as intimacy. To understand how healing dismantles this possession, you must first understand the architecture of the wound itself. When the aura is unhealed, there is a symbolic hole, an opening shaped like the original absence. In dreams, it often appears as a cracked vessel, a leaking cup, a broken doorway, or a house missing one of its walls. These dreams are not random. They are psychological X-rays. They reflect the state of your psychic membrane. But when the empath begins to heal, these dreams shift. The house forms walls, the vessel is repaired, the door is replaced. These dream motifs signal that the unconscious is reconstructing the aura from the inside. Healing begins the moment the empath stops interpreting their sensitivity as a liability. The rare aura is not something that must be hardened, it must be integrated. Integration is not the closing of the heart, but the strengthening of the container that holds the heart. When you begin to hold your emotional truth without abandoning yourself, the psychic membrane thickens. This is not an act of willpower. It is the natural consequence of consciousness returning to the places you once left unguarded. When consciousness enters the wound, it becomes illuminated. And what was illuminated can no longer be manipulated. This is where the narcissist begins to lose their grip, not in conflict, not in confrontation, but in quiet internal shifts that they cannot understand. The empath begins to feel themselves again. They begin to sense the subtle difference between their emotions and the emotions projected onto them. The energetic fog that once filled their mind begins to clear. And the narcissist who relied on that fog to maintain confusion, dependency, and emotional enmeshment feels their influence fading. One of the first signs of healing is that the empath begins to dream differently. The dream figures that once chased you now stand still. The mother archetype that once appeared as devouring or distant now appears wounded, human, or even transparent. The narcissist disguised shadow figure loses its shape, shrinking into something smaller, less threatening. These are signs that the unconscious is withdrawing its projection. The psyche is reclaiming what it once handed over. Another sign is the sudden return of anger, not the destructive kind, but the sacred anger that accompanies emotional boundaries. Many empaths fear anger because they associate it with the chaos of the adults who hurt them. But anger is not chaos. Anger is clarity. It is the fire that guards the doorway of the soul. When the empath begins to feel this anger rising from deep within, it is the unconscious announcing, "This territory is mine." And when that declaration occurs, even silently, the narcissist feels the shift as though a psychic tether has loosened. I have seen this pattern countless times when the empath heals even a fragment of their rare aura wound. The narcissist instinctively senses it. They cannot articulate it consciously, but they feel suddenly threatened, destabilized, or irrelevant. They react with rage or panic or love bombing or silent withdrawal. They attempt to reinsert themselves into your field using every method they once successfully deployed. But what they do not understand is that the psychic contract is dissolving. The empath, even if they do not feel fully strong yet, is beginning to wake from a long trance. The waking is not dramatic, it is subtle. It is the slow return of one's own voice, one's own preferences, one's own emotional rhythm. It is the rediscovery of selfhood. And because the narcissist's influence depended entirely on the empath's self-forgetting, the return of the self makes manipulation impossible. When the empath begins to wake, the aura no longer absorbs the narcissist's projections. Instead, it reflects them. This reflection forces the narcissist to confront their own shadow, and because they have spent a lifetime evading that confrontation, they perceive your healing as an existential threat. Understand this. The narcissist is not losing power over you. They are losing access to a part of themselves they outsourced into you. Your healing forces them to meet themselves, and they cannot bear that encounter. No, let me tell you something. Few people understand the rare aura wound. When healed, becomes a rare aura gift. The same openness that once made you vulnerable becomes a powerful intuitive instrument. Your sensitivity, once unguarded, becomes attuned, and your attunement becomes perception. You begin to sense shadow without absorbing it. You begin to read motives without internalizing them. You begin to recognize emotional truth without losing your own. This is the real transformation, not becoming harder, but becoming sovereign. Sovereignty is the psychic state in which the empath can no longer be possessed. And when sovereignty is reached, the narcissist's grip does not simply loosen, it vanishes. There is nothing left for them to grasp. In the next part, I will guide you deeper into the archetypal transformation that occurs inside the empath at the moment the rare aura wound seals, the moment the shadow integrates, and the moment the narcissist becomes psychologically irrelevant. You will see how the inner child, the mother archetype, and the shadow self converge in the precise instant of liberation, and why the empath's destiny rewrites itself the moment they reclaim their psychic field. There comes a moment in every empath's inner journey that I consider a psychological event of extraordinary magnitude. a kind of psychic sunrise that occurs not outwardly but inwardly, illuminating the chambers of the soul that had been dark for decades. This moment is subtle, yet seismic. It is the instant the empath realizes that the suffering they carried was never a defect, but an inheritance. Never a weakness, but an initiation. And once this realization dawns, the rare aura begins its alchemical repair from the inside. You must understand that the rare aura wound is not healed through force, nor through intellectual effort, nor through the mere desire to detach from toxic people. The healing occurs when the empath's unconscious finally retrieves a fragment of the self that was abandoned in childhood. This retrieval is not a dramatic rescue, but a quiet reabsorption, a return of psychic matter that was once exiled to survive. Many empaths report that before this healing moment, they feel haunted, not by spirits, but by an inner emptiness, a sense that a part of them is missing. It is the echo of the self lost to early emotional survival. It is the silent cry of the inner child who learned to dim their presence to keep peace, to abandon their needs, to avoid rejection, to dissolve themselves, so the mother archetype would not turn cold. And this abandonment, this psychic self-erasure, created the very permeability the narcissist later exploited. The narcissist sensed the vacancy, the unclaimed psychic room, and filled it with their dominance, their insecurities, their fantasies. They install themselves in your field as though they were the rightful owner, but they were only tenants living in space that never belonged to them. Healing begins when you evict them not through anger, but through reclamation. The empath's deepest healing is not the removal of the narcissist. It is the homecoming of the self. This homecoming often appears first in dreams. You may dream of a younger version of yourself standing in a dim hallway, waiting, watching you with eyes full of longing. You may dream of a lost object, a small box, a journal, a key buried under dust, which you finally uncover. Or you may dream of a child hiding behind a door, trembling, waiting for someone to find them. These dreams reveal that the unconscious is preparing a reunion. When the reunion occurs, a psychic shift follows. The aura begins to thicken, not as armor, but as presence. Presence is the antidote to possession. A person who is fully present in their own psyche cannot be occupied by another. At this stage, the empath begins to feel something unfamiliar. Weight, ground, density. They are no longer a floating emotional receptacle, but a rooted being. Their voice resonates differently, their breathing slows, their intuition sharpens, but no longer overwhelms them. They feel themselves contained within themselves for the first time. It is precisely at this moment that the narcissist becomes destabilized. Though the empath may not immediately understand why, you must remember the narcissist's power was never real. It was permitted. They operated within a psychic vacancy that has now closed. They sense the closing before the empath does. They sense the doorway sealing, they sense the host returning to the house, and they feel panic. The narcissist may try to re-enter through familiar strategies, seduction, guilt, rage, nostalgia. But these strategies fail not because the empath resists them, but because the empath has become someone who no longer responds to them. The psychic resonance is gone. You cannot manipulate a frequency that has risen beyond your reach. This is the stage I call the archetypal inversion. The empath who once embodied the wounded child archetype transforms into the inner parent, the protector of their own psyche. And the narcissist who once appeared as the psychological giant shrinks into the archetype of the lost child. The inversion is not moral, it is archetypal. The narcissist is forced to face their own fragility without the empath's aura to stabilize them. When this inversion happens, you may notice that the narcissist no longer feels powerful. They feel small, transparent, predictably. Their words echo without impact. Their emotional storms no longer shake you. Their criticisms bounce off the intact membrane of your psyche. A healed empath does not become indifferent. They become immune. Immunity is the hallmark of aura repair. It is not that you cease to feel, it is that you cease to absorb. The energy that once entered you now stops at the edge of your field, unable to penetrate. This is the psychological boundary the empath never had in childhood. And once this boundary forms, the narcissist cannot access you, not emotionally, not spiritually, not psychically, but healing continues deeper still. In the unconscious, the mother archetype undergoes transformation. The mother who once appeared devouring, neglectful, or indifferent now begins to reflect new qualities. She becomes less monstrous, less overwhelming, less shadowy. This transformation does not reflect the biological parent. It reflects your inner relationship with the maternal archetype. As the archetype transforms, the wound softens. The rare aura becomes whole, and the empath begins to breathe differently, no longer through the lungs of survival, but through the lungs of sovereignty. You must understand, the empath's greatest transformation is not the healing of pain, but the maturation of the psyche. In maturity, the empath no longer sees themselves as the eternal giver, the emotional healer, the sacrificial lamb. They become instead the guardian of their own inner temple. They become selective with their energy, discerning with their intuition, rooted in their truth. This new psychic configuration alters everything. Suddenly, the empath no longer gravitates toward chaotic individuals. The magnetic pull toward narcissists dissolves. The compulsion to fix, to save, to heal others evaporates. The empath begins to see the difference between compassion and self-erasure, between love and self-sacrifice, between intuition and projection. Here's the most important truth when the empath heals. Their attraction recalibrates. They are no longer drawn to those who mirror the wound. They are drawn to those who mirror the healed self. This is why the narcissist loses not only their grip, but also their relevance. The empath psyche no longer vibrates at the frequency of trauma. It vibrates at the frequency of self-possession. The narcissist, who once felt like destiny, now feels like a detour, a teacher, a symbol, nothing more. And this symbolic understanding is the final dissolution of psychic grip. When someone becomes a symbol rather than a savior or persecutor, they lose the power of enchantment. They become simply a figure in the story of your individuation. Once the enchantment breaks, the bond breaks, but something even more sacred occurs. The empath finally recognizes their aura not as rare because it is fragile, but as rare because it is refined. A healed aura does not dim, it radiates. It does not invite invasion. It commands respect. It does not attract predators. It distinguishes them. The rare aura wound becomes the rare aura power. In the next part, we will reach the deepest layer the moment the empath steps fully into individuation. The psychological rebirth, where shadow and self integrate, where the aura becomes luminous but impenetrable, and where the narcissist disappears, not by force, but by irrelevance. This is the true liberation, the end of psychic possession, and the dawn of a new destiny. There is a moment, quiet and nearly imperceptible from the outside, when the empath crosses a psychological threshold that forever alters the landscape of their inner life. I have seen this moment arrive in patients with tears streaming down their faces. In others, with a strange calm settling over them like a dawn mist. And in a rare few with a sudden laughter that seemed to rise from the depths of the unconscious itself. Though the expressions differ, the moment is always the same. It is the instant the soul realizes it will no longer betray itself in order to be loved. This is the final healing of the rare aura wound. When the soul makes this declaration, not in words but in vibration, the entire psychic structure shifts. The rare aura, once thin and porous, thickens into something luminous, resilient, and sovereign. It is not a wall, but a membrane alive, intelligent, permeable only by choice. The empath feels, often for the first time in their adult life, that they exist as a center rather than as a reflection. They stop orbiting others. They become the axis of their own being. At this point, the narcissist, whether physically present or merely psychologically internalized, loses all access, not gradually, not partially, but completely. For the narcissist's power depended entirely on one thing, the empath's belief that they needed someone else to confirm their worth, their identity, their emotional reality. Once that need evaporates, the psychic grip dissolves like smoke. Manipulation loses its oxygen. The spell breaks. Many empaths describe this moment as though they are waking from a dream. They didn't know they were dreaming. They look back at the narcissist behavior, once confusing, hypnotic, consuming, and suddenly see it with crisp clarity, as though seen through new eyes. Behaviors they once explained away now appear transparent. Lies they once absorbed now seem flimsy. Emotional storms that once drenched them now feel like distant weather, irrelevant to their inner climate. This clarity is not anger, it is illumination. And illumination is what the narcissist fears most. Because once the empath sees clearly, the narcissist loses their camouflage, they lose their illusion of power, they lose the ability to rewrite your emotions, infiltrate your instincts, or twist your perception of yourself. They become, at last, what they always were, a frightened psyche, trapped in its own unintegrated shadow. When the empath reaches this clarity, they often feel an extraordinary stillness, as though the unconscious itself has exhaled, as though the inner child, long abandoned, has finally been found and embraced, as though the mother archetype, once distorted and devouring, has shrunk into something understandable, forgivable, manageable. This stillness can feel holy, as though one has stepped into the temple of their own soul. And it is in this temple that the final transformation occurs. The empath, who once lived as a psychic sponge, absorbing the emotions and projections of others, now becomes a psychic mirror, reflective, aware, so ein. A mirror cannot be possessed. A mirror does not abandon itself. A mirror reveals truth without absorbing it. This is the rare aura in its healed form. It becomes an aura that does not dim itself to make others feel comfortable. It does not bend to fit the emotional shape of the room. It does not soften itself to avoid provoking the insecurities of others. It does not open on command. It does not close out of fear. It simply exists in alignment with its own nature, sensitive yet strong, intuitive yet grounded, open yet discerning. At this level of individuation, the empath no longer relates to the narcissist as victim or as magnet, but as witness. The narcissist's attempts to provoke or guilt trip feel transparent, almost theatrical. Their flattery feels hollow. Their criticisms lose all weight. Their emotional demands become noise. And the empath, no longer compelled to explain themselves or justify their boundaries, naturally withdraws from the game without announcing their departure. The narcissist may rage, they may plead, they may accuse, they may attempt to resurrect old patterns of control, but nothing works, because the empath is no longer the same person, and more importantly, they no longer inhabit the same psyche. The narcissist cannot manipulate someone whose inner child has been rescued. They cannot destabilize someone whose mother archetype has been integrated. They cannot shame someone whose shadow has been befriended. They cannot control someone whose aura has become sovereign. This is why the grip ends instantly, not gradually. When the empath heals the rare aura wound, they remove the psychological anchor that held the narcissist in place. And without an anchor, the narcissist drifts, lost in the sea of their own unresolved pain. But the empath does not drift. They rise. The rising is not dramatic. It does not look like triumph. It looks like peace, a peace so deep it feels like a rebirth, a peace that comes from finally belonging to oneself, a peace that no longer confuses chaos with connection, a peace that recognizes manipulation as a plea for help rather than as a measure of one's worth, a peace that does not require external validation because the internal structure is now whole. In this rising, the empath begins to attract a different kind of world. They meet people who resonate with wholeness rather than with hunger. They form relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than silent sacrifice. Their intuition guides them not into the familiar wound, but into the unfamiliar possibility. Their emotional alchemy, once used to soothe others, now becomes the instrument through which they create meaning, beauty, and purpose. But perhaps the most profound change is this: the empath finally understands that their sensitivity was never the problem. Their sensitivity was the gift. The wound was the teacher. The narcissist was the catalyst. The pain was the initiation. The healing was the return. And the rare aura they once feared was not rare because it was fragile. It was rare because it was sacred. A sacred aura cannot be owned. A sacred aura cannot be drained. A sacred aura cannot be broken. It can only be dimmed through unconsciousness and restored through awareness. When the empath reaches this awareness, this bright, steady, sovereign awareness, the shadow no longer hunts them. The mother wound no longer bleeds. The inner child no longer cries. The narcissist no longer grips. The psyche no longer fractures. The empath becomes whole. And wholeness, my dear friend, is the final liberation. It is the moment you step out of the psychic labyrinth and into the open field of your destiny, not controlled by others, not shaped by wounds, not defined by trauma, but authored by the self that has finally come home. This is the hidden law. The moment you heal the rare aura wound, the world that once fed on your openness loses all access, and you, at last, become the keeper of your own light.